June 12th, 2012, 4:47 in the morning. A hospital room in Los Angeles, California. A 69-year-old man lies in a bed with tubes running from his arms and monitors beeping softly in the dark. His heart is failing. It has been failing for months. His girlfriend, Lisa Caserta, sits beside him. His family is nearby. There is no drama, no gunshots, no car bombs, no shallow graves in upstate New York. Henry Hill, the most famous informant in American Mafia history, the man whose testimony put away 50 mobsters, the man whose life became Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, dies one day after his 69th birthday, quietly, in a hospital bed, of heart disease. That is not how Mafia stories are supposed to end. But here is what Goodfellas never showed you. The movie ends with Ray Liotta standing on a suburban doorstep in a bathrobe, complaining about being an average nobody. A schnook. The credits roll, the audience goes home, and Henry Hill disappears into the witness protection program. That is where the real story begins. Because the 32 years between that doorstep and that hospital bed were more chaotic, more pathetic, and more revealing about the true nature of the Mafia than anything Scorsese put on screen. This is the story of what happened to Henry Hill after the cameras stopped rolling. How America's most famous rat spent 3 decades stumbling through witness protection, drug arrests, bigamy, celebrity cooking, and a slow, ugly decline that proved something Goodfellas only hinted at. You can leave the Mafia, but you can never leave what the Mafia made you. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11th, 1943 in Manhattan. His father, Henry Hill Sr., was an Irish-American electrician. His mother, Carmela Costa, was a Sicilian immigrant. The family, 8 children in total, grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Working class, paycheck to paycheck. Nothing extraordinary about any of it, except for what was across the street. A dispatch cab stand on the corner of Henry's block was the headquarters of Paul Vario, a capo regime in the Lucchese crime family. Henry watched the men who came and went from that cab stand the way other kids watched baseball players. The suits, the cars, the respect. He was 11 years old when he walked in and asked for a job. By the age of 13, he had met James Burke, the man Robert De Niro would later play as Jimmy Conway in Goodfellas. Burke was an Irish associate of the Lucchese family, a hijacker, a killer, and a tipper. Hill later recalled, "He was sawbucking me to death. 20 here, 20 there. He wasn't like anyone else I had ever met." By 14, Henry had a union card in the bricklayers local, a no-show job paying $190 a week. He dropped out of high school. He was running errands, collecting policy bets, and picking up loan payments for the Vario crew. That is the part Goodfellas gets right, the seduction, the pull of the life, a kid from nothing who suddenly had everything. What the movie compresses is the next 25 years. In 1960, at 17, Henry joined the Army. He served with the 82nd Airborne at Fort Bragg. Even in uniform, he was hustling. He ran the kitchen detail and sold surplus food. He loan-sharked pay advances to other soldiers. He sold tax-free cigarettes at a markup. He spent 2 months in the stockade for stealing a sheriff's car and brawling with Marines. The Army did not fix Henry Hill. Nothing ever fixed Henry Hill. He came home in 1963 and the real career started. Arson, hijacking, stolen car rings. In 1965, he married Karen Friedman, a nice Jewish girl from Long Island who had no idea what she was walking into. Paul Vario set them up on the date. Lorraine Bracco would play Karen in Goodfellas, and the movie captures the intoxication of the early years. The Copacabana, the front tables, the envelopes of cash. Then came the Air France Hest in 1967. Henry and Tommy DeSimone walked into a cargo terminal at JFK Airport with an empty suitcase and walked out with $420,000 in cash. No alarm, no shots fired, no one injured. The theft was not even discovered until the following Monday, when a Wells Fargo truck arrived to collect the money and found it gone. Then the murder of Billy Batts. June 11th, 1970. William Bentvena, a made member of the Gambino family, walked into the Suite, Henry's restaurant on Queens Boulevard. Tommy DeSimone was there. Batts made the mistake of his life. He looked at Tommy and said something about shining shoes, a reference to Tommy's younger days. According to Hill, DeSimone leaned over and whispered, "I'm gonna kill that fuck." 2 weeks later, near closing time, Tommy pistol-whipped Batts in the bar. They loaded his body into the trunk of Henry's car. On the drive upstate, they heard sounds from the trunk. Batts was still alive. They stopped the car. DeSimone and Burke beat him to death with a shovel and a tire iron on the side of the road. That is the scene Joe Pesci plays in Goodfellas. The movie gets the violence right. What it does not get right is the consequence. Batts was a made man in the Gambino family. Killing a made man without permission from the family boss is a death sentence. It took years, but that murder eventually came back for Tommy DeSimone. The Gambinos killed him in 1979. His body was never found. Then came the extortion conviction in 1972 that sent Henry to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, where he served 4 years alongside Paul Vario himself. The drug trafficking that started in prison, where a contact from Pittsburgh taught Hill how to smuggle narcotics past the guards, accelerated after his release in 1978. Marijuana, cocaine, heroin. Henry was dealing all of it, and Jimmy Burke eventually joined him, even though the Lucchese family's official policy was no drugs. Drugs brought heat. Drugs brought federal attention. And drugs brought down Henry Hill. Then the moment everything collapsed. In 1980, Henry Hill was arrested on narcotics charges. He was facing 25 years to life. He was strung out on cocaine, paranoid, and convinced that Jimmy Burke was going to kill him. Hill testified that Burke had already murdered most of the people involved in the Lufthansa heist to eliminate witnesses. Hill believed he was next, so he flipped. He picked up the phone and called the FBI. Everything that came after, everything, flows from that single decision. Henry Hill became a federal informant. His testimony led to 50 convictions. Paul Vario went to prison for extortion. Jimmy Burke went to prison for the murder of Richard Eaton, a con man from Queens. Burke would die behind bars in 1996 at the age of 64. Hill and his family, his wife Karen and their 2 children, Greg and Gina, entered the Witness Protection Program. They were given new identities. Hill became Martin Lewis. They were relocated to Omaha, Nebraska, then to Independence, Kentucky, then to Redmond, Washington. A new life, a clean start. The government's end of the bargain. But here is what the Witness Protection Program could not fix. It could not fix Henry Hill. Within months of entering the program, Hill was using again. Cocaine. Alcohol. The man could not stay clean and could not stay quiet. The entire point of witness protection is anonymity. You get a new name, a new city, a new past. You disappear. You keep your mouth shut and you live. Henry Hill was constitutionally incapable of keeping his mouth shut. He told people who he was, he told neighbors, he told bartenders. He bragged about the life, about Goodfellas, about Paulie and Jimmy and Tommy. He was arrested multiple times for drug possession and public intoxication. The U.S. Marshals moved him and his family from city to city, trying to keep him hidden. But you cannot hide a man who keeps introducing himself as the real Henry Hill. In 1987, the government kicked him out of the witness protection program, expelled for what they called relentless misbehavior. Drug arrests, public scenes, inability to maintain his cover identity for even a few months at a time. Think about that. The federal government designed a program specifically to keep people alive. They gave Henry Hill a new name, a new home, new documents, and a monthly stipend. All he had to do was be quiet, and he could not do it. By 1989, Henry and Karen separated. Their marriage had been disintegrating for years, poisoned by his drug use, his infidelity, and the suffocating paranoia of life on the run. What Goodfellas does not show is that while still legally married to Karen and living under witness protection as Martin Lewis, Hill married another woman named Sherry Anders in Virginia City, Nevada, in 1981, bigamy. He could not even hide correctly from one wife, let alone two. The divorce from Karen was not finalized until 2002. 13 years of legal separation. By then, Henry had married a third woman named Kelly Allure, and that marriage too had ended in divorce. But the expulsion from witness protection did something unexpected. It made Henry Hill famous. Goodfellas had been released in 1990, 3 years after he left the program. Suddenly, the real Henry Hill was a celebrity, not a hidden witness, not a protected informant, a public figure. And Henry, who had spent his entire life craving attention and status, leaned into it with everything he had. He appeared on the Howard Stern show multiple times. He went on 60 Minutes. He posed for Entertainment Weekly alongside Ray Liotta, the man who had played him on screen. In 2006, Liotta looked at the bloated, aging, still drinking Hill and told him he needed to go to rehab. Hill checked into a facility 2 days later. He wrote books. The Wise Guy Cookbook, published in 2002, was a collection of family recipes mixed with mob anecdotes. He started selling his own spaghetti sauce online called Sunday Gravy. He worked as a chef at an Italian restaurant in North Platte, Nebraska. In 2007, he opened his own restaurant in West Haven, Connecticut. He called it Wise Guys. It closed 1 month later after a fire. He painted. Acrylic paintings of mob scenes sold online and at galleries, signed by the real Henry Hill. Bright, childlike colors depicting the Lufthansa heist, the Copacabana, scenes from Goodfellas. Some sold for thousands of dollars. The man who had hijacked trucks and dealt cocaine and helped bury Billy Bats in a shallow grave was now autographing canvases for collectors who wanted a piece of the legend. According to people who knew him in those years, Hill would tell the same stories over and over, the same Paulie stories, the same Jimmy stories, the same Tommy stories. Each time a little more embellished, each time a little more rehearsed. He had become a performer. The life was the act, and the act was the only thing keeping him relevant. This was the real Henry Hill, not the slick young hustler Ray Liotta played, not the wise narrator guiding you through the glamour of the life. A bloated, aging addict, cashing in on the worst decisions he had ever made. And the arrests kept coming. In 2001, another drug charge in Seattle. In 2004, he was arrested at the North Platte Regional Airport in Nebraska and charged with methamphetamine possession. Methamphetamine, not cocaine, not marijuana. Meth? He was sentenced to 180 days in 2005. In 2009, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of public intoxication in Los Angeles. In December of that same year, he was arrested again for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. He blamed the alcohol. He always blamed the alcohol. Here's the thing about Henry Hill that Goodfellas captures perfectly in its final scene, but that most viewers miss. When Liotta stands on that doorstep and says he is a nobody now, it sounds like a complaint, like the movie is asking you to sympathize with a gangster who lost his toys. But that is not what the scene means. What it means is that Henry Hill was never anything without the Mafia. He was not smart enough to run a legitimate business. He was not disciplined enough to stay sober. He was not strong enough to build a real life. The Mafia gave him structure, purpose, money, and status. Without it, he was exactly what he always feared, an average nobody. The last 6 years of his life were spent in Topanga Canyon, California, with Lisa Caserta. They were engaged but never married. Hill's health was declining. Decades of cocaine, alcohol, and cigarettes had destroyed his heart. He had been in and out of hospitals. According to Caserta, in his final months, Hill was reflective. He was quieter than he had been in years. The bravado was gone. The stories had all been told 100 times on 100 radio shows. There was nothing left to perform. On June 11, 2012, Henry Hill turned 69. On June 12, 2012, his heart stopped. Caserta told CBS News that he went out pretty peacefully for a good fella. He was cremated. There was no Mafia funeral, no procession, no flowers from the old crew. Everyone from the old crew was either dead or in prison. Paul Vario died in prison in 1988. Jimmy Burke died in prison in 1996. Tommy DeSimone was murdered by the Gambino family in 1979. Karen Hill moved on. Their children, Greg and Gina, had spent their childhoods being dragged from city to city under assumed names, never knowing if someone would come for their father. Henry Hill spent 25 years in the Mafia and 32 years running from it. He made millions and died with almost nothing. He was the most famous rat in American organized crime history, and the fact that no one ever killed him is perhaps the strangest part of the story. The old Lucchese crew was gone. Burke was locked up. Vario was dead. And by the time Hill was out in the open, appearing on talk shows and selling spaghetti sauce, he was not worth the bullet. Killing him would have brought more heat than letting him live. And that is how the Mafia actually works. Not the way Hollywood tells it, not blood oaths and vendettas that last generations. It is about cost-benefit analysis. Henry Hill alive and embarrassing himself on Howard Stern was less of a threat than Henry Hill dead and on every front page in America. And that might be the cruelest verdict of all. Not that the Mafia wanted him dead, but that they decided he was not worth killing. If you found this story revealing, hit subscribe. We drop a new documentary every week. Leave a comment and tell me, do you think Henry Hill got what he deserved? A quiet death in a hospital bed? Or should the story have ended differently? Because at Old World Syndicate, we do not just retell the legends. We uncover what really happened and why.